Hello, everybody. I love it. Welcome to another episode of the Cackle, where we meet with Midwest changemakers and connect the dots between economic trends and the lived experiences of people navigating them. I'm Emily Heinz. I'm the founder and managing director of Entry Point. At Entry Point, we partner with economic development organizations and nonprofits to foster inclusive and vibrant communities across the Midwest through research and community-focused programming. If you're looking for an insider's take on the opportunities and challenges facing today's most inspiring change makers, you'll definitely want to join the conversation. And something really cool we have coming up that's like a new thing. If you're an economic developer or a nonprofit and you want to learn a little bit more about how to strengthen your impact, you'll definitely want to join us on May 7th. We're doing a roundtable called Strengthening Your Impact Through Data. And you can sign up at the link. We'll put it in the comments somewhere. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are a repeat cackler, welcome back. And with me today is Raj Nation from Startup Hypeman. I am so excited to see you again.
I'm excited to see you. It's been like 2 years since we met.
I know.
And you still have I still hold you in such high regard because we had a conversation about Royce the 5'9". So if you want to like go off script, we can just do a whole hip hop conversation today if you want.
I know. I'm feeling a little sad though. This last week with DMX's passing.
I know.
I was like, and then I saw this video that I thought, now we're really getting on a tangent. Now we're going to be talking about DMX the whole time. I saw this video that I thought was real of like them in a car, and they were like blasting music, and everyone was like, oh yeah, like going crazy, like with DMX like songs and stuff like that in the streets. And then I found out it was like actually just from like a concert like years ago, but I thought it was a procession, and I was like, oh my god!
You thought it was like the end of a Biggie movie?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so for everybody, for those of you that don't know, Raj is like the coolest storyteller ever. I saw him at Intermittent 2 years ago. You spoke, and Heidi Cron, shout out, is the founder of Intermittent, and you did the whole Hamilton intro, like, and like wove that into like how companies can like tell their stories more effectively. And I was like trying to write notes. I'm like so bad at this, so I'm like super excited to have you on. So talk a bit about your background and like what led you to kind of like your obsession with like communication and voice and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's just always been something that's been like in me. And several years ago is when I had this realization that like, wait a second, everything I've ever cared about has had something to do with this idea of like expression. And I actually think this may sound weird, but I actually think like the reason I'm on this earth is to put more expression into the world and to bring out more expression from other people. And so if I kind of dialed that in a little bit more, I was like, okay, voice is what's really important to me. And the thing that I like hate to see the most is when I feel like someone or something is not able to use their voice. They feel like they either can't, or they feel like they don't know how, or that they're not allowed to, or that it wouldn't be like I'm not the type of person who, or we're not the type of brand who, right? That idea of like almost like your voice being muffled really, really like gets at me. And when I see people in situations where they feel like they cannot express themselves, that I think more than anything is what I'm like, that's the problem I need to be fixing in the world.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like been like embedded in me for so long, even before I realized it. And I think back to like all the things that like I was drawn to growing up, and it all kind of follows this same thread line. And so with that, I was naturally doing things before I realized it. And it was all in this field of voice, if you will, this field of expression, working in marketing, working in sales, doing this pitch work now with Startup Hypeman, being a hip hop artist as well, teaching yoga. I think that's very much about like, voice, having a voice for the room, but then allowing the students to tap into their own inner voice at the same time. So it's kind of this nice little like, this little like tape ball, if you will, of these different colors of tape that all come together under this idea of voice and expression.
Do you feel like now we're going to be like getting all like into it? Do you feel like that like sense of like really being bothered by people's voices not being heard and things like came from something like you experienced either in like the corporate world or like growing up in school or like anything like that, or what? Like, why do you think about it?
Yeah, I actually think there were probably some seedlings of it anyways, because like, I'm not kidding. If I think back to like 4th grade in our like recycling unit, I had created like a remix on paper. I created a remix of Mo Money, Mo Problems. It was like Mo Trash, Mo Problems or something like that, or More Garbage, More Problems. So there was stuff in there like, very, very early on. And perhaps also because I'm like a Sagittarius, and that's a lot about like how Sagittarii act, if that's a word, Sagittarii. But there's a couple probably like key, more like intentional moments. And I think, I don't remember if you were at Intermittent last year, the virtual one that we did. But I did the opening keynote for that. And I just shared a story about like how after September 11th happened, I had this major, like, I don't know about like identity crisis is the right word, but like I was looked at differently by the same people who I had been going to school with, every day up to that point in my life for whatever it was. I think it was 7th grade for me. And that was it.
I'm old. Man, really? And I was like, you saw them still? Like, whatever. I was in college.
So that, and that was like a pretty young age, right? And that's exactly where I kind of realized, or, when I thought back to it, I was like, okay, well, that was a moment where I felt like I had no voice, because if I were to say anything that was not going to conspire with the norm, which was basically a norm of like hating any person of color, I was going to be left out. And so I'm like, I don't want anyone, the more I think about it, I'm like, that's probably like the first pivotal moment where I'm like, I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt on that day and the days ensuing.
Yeah. And that is totally like 7th grade as well, is like
it's the worst collection of human beings.
Yeah. Like everything's terrible. One time when I was in high school, I went back to the middle school to talk about band, because I was in band, every band ever, like biggest band nerd ever. Nice. And like go back to the middle school to be like hype up band, stay in band, kids. And the 6th graders were like, I love band. How's high school? And then the 7th graders came in and they were like, look at that kid. I was like, what? Between 6th grade and 7th grade. These kids are terrible. Like,
it's unbelievable how terrible every single human being is when you get to like 7th and 8th grade. And then you get a little bit better like in high school. But yeah, those 2 middle school years are just the worst.
Yeah. And I feel like that is like probably like the worst year, where you already feel kind of like, oh, everything I say is like under scrutiny by my peers and things like that. Plus having an actual significant real life thing happen, like 9/11. I could totally see that, man. So then it's like fast forward, it totally does make sense that would kind of like transform. And as you were like going through like marketing and like all of these things and like really like learning how to like message and like craft a message and things like that, that's like so interesting. And then I've like read a lot about how you feel like you take like a non-traditional approach to marketing. So kind of describe like what that is, and then like how you discovered like more non-traditional approach versus traditional approach.
So I think most marketing is pretty bad. I'm just going to come out and say it. And I think, I think most marketing is pretty bad. I think most people look at it's kind of cliche to say, but they look at like how to like they stay within the box. And even though they may say we think outside the box here, the fact that they use that phrase is like an indication that they're still worried about the box.
Yeah.
So the way I've always looked at it is like if I'm going to appear like live in front of a room, if I'm going to appear, if I'm going to be teaching something, if I'm going to be putting out content, the clients I work with, like if we're going to like build your pitch deck, if we're going to build your sales presentation, if we're going to build your pitch, whatever it might be, the thought I always have in my head is, how do we make this a radically mind-blowing experience? How do we make this so good or interesting or different that the person consuming it cannot go to sleep until they've told someone else about it? And that, to me, if you have like that perspective on it, you start to look at like the non-traditional aspects, right? Or you look at like, hey, what's a different way we can be going about this than just the same thing? It's almost like you think about how do you make yourself forwardable, if you will. Like someone reads your newsletter and they're like, oh, I got to forward this on to someone else, or like they see some post, right? So
like that's and they're like, oh my God, I have to tell everyone and share.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's exactly right. Honestly, I was watching the last episode and I was like, oh, I should reach out to your guest. And because I really enjoyed what she had to say. So like, that's an example where like the show you produced was interesting enough that it made me take action in some way.
Yeah.
So that's the perspective I think more people should have when they think about marketing their stuff or selling their stuff, is this idea of like the radically mind-blowing experience. And then especially so over the last year where everything's been virtual, I was doing a lot of in-person workshops, and then all that I was doing some of it virtual before, but all of it went virtual over the last year. And my whole thing was, I was like, all right, well, how do I make this as good as it would be if it were in person, or even not as good? How do I make it even better than if it were in person?
Yeah. And
the thought I had in my head was, nobody puts baby in the corner browser tab. And I'm like, okay, any webinar I'm doing, any online training that I'm doing, nobody's going to put me in the corner browser tab. So how do I make sure I stay front and center? I'm not the thing that's hidden in the background while they're passively listening. How do I make it? And it's because I know it's not about me. It's because I know I have value to give them. And I know if they're paying attention, they're going to leave that thing saying, wow, I'm thinking different. I'm thinking in a different way. I have a perspective shifted. And so, when I do, like I just did one last night for Startup Grind Seattle. Cool. I have this workshop called How to Not Suck at Pitching Your Startup. And so I did it for them. And what I did there that I've been doing like every time I do this workshop virtually is I'll like use the chat window to say, okay, hey, if you're vibing with this, give me the number 1 in the chat right now. And you get this flood of ones. Or like, hey, if you understand what I'm saying right here, capital letter U in the chat right now. So like I'll actively use the chat. Or I'll have them like, we did this when it was in person, we did this. And I think it's arguably more fun virtually. When I talk about the importance of like an elevator pitch, I use the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme as an example. And I have everyone come off mute and we sing that together. Like with like the Zoom lags and all.
Yeah.
And now it's become like it's gone from like passive viewing to active participation.
Yeah.
And to me, that's like this idea of how do you do this differently?
What do you think about, so it sounds like you're a very like cameras on person, like when you're having a discussion or whatever. Like I know there's like a lot of people that have said like over the last year since video calls and like webinars and all the things have become so popular, where they're like, you don't need to turn your cameras on, like you don't need to like welcome people like into your home virtually and things like that. Like how do you kind of still make sure you're engaging with people, or what do you feel about that? Because I'm a very like also like a very cameras on, like I want to see who I'm talking to. It's like really awkward to not be able to ever see someone.
You mean you don't want to walk? You don't want to talk to someone for an hour where all you see is their headshot?
That's really great. And that's a really great impression of a headshot. Jesus. Okay. Yes. Anyway, keep it together. Yeah. Like, what do you think of that? Like, do you tell people cameras on, or how do you kind of navigate that whole thing?
I think context matters. I think if you're in front of a customer or a potential customer, camera on, ask them to turn theirs on. They are not required to, but you should ask them to.
Yeah.
And I think because it's like you're trying to have a conversation with someone, right? And I think it's just harder to have a conversation if you're looking at their headshot or you're looking at just a screen with just their name on it. Then there's other situations where, like, if it's an internal call, obviously you still want to like see your coworkers, but maybe not every time. And so there's some, take as an audio, take it as a normal phone call, go for a walk, right? Those things are fine. I just think when it has to do with like being the marketer of your company or being the salesperson of your company, being in front of your audience, if you will, your external audience, your customers, your prospects, your leads, that's where it's really important to have cameras on, and also whenever possible request that they have theirs on. And you can like make it, you don't have to like put pressure on them. You can just be like, hey, love it if you have your camera on. No worries if you can't though. Most people will just be like, sure. Or they'll be like, hey, usually I do, but I'm like actually like picking up my kid right now, so I don't want to have and it's like, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's bad to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I would, of course I would. I am like, definitely, I am just like a cameras on person. So then whenever I run into a cameras off person, I'm like, okay, there are cameras off, and that's cool. It's not you. It's just the situation.
Yeah. But I'll also say with that too, like whenever possible, given your home or your office setup, and I'm at my office right now, like let your background reflect your personality, right? So if you look back here, right, like this, we're cut in half on this, but on a normal call, it's like the whole screen is shown.
If you want.
And I've got like there we go. Look at that. Like I've got like everything that kind of speaks to my personality back here. I have a wrestling championship belt with my logo on it. I've got an on-air sign. I've got the Hamilton book. I've got a microphone. I've got a book about Kobe. I've got a book about The Rock, right? And so it creates some decent conversation piece. And also I have some plants over here that are perennially dying. And I can't figure out how to keep them, how to get them to grow and not just stay at where they are.
Yeah.
And all of these things. Yeah. It's like, it makes me, or it helps get across who I am to the other person. And oftentimes it creates a conversation starter, which is much better than how's the weather there?
Yeah, true. Or talking about the pandemic is like,
yeah. Oh God. Yeah. So how's it going in Michigan with the pandemic? I don't know. It sucks. How's it where you are?
Yeah, we're still by day 9,000. Yeah. As you like slightly try to dance around like any politics discussion about mask wearing or something like that, or you just or something, or everyone's living their own lives. This is another. How's the weather? And then you just switch it directly back to the weather. At any rate, it would be good. So define. I have 9,000 questions for you, so I got to hurry myself up here. But how do you define? How do you define marketing? So when you said earlier that you felt like marketing is just like most marketing sucks or something, just for those of us who are like not really totally sure what they're doing ever, what exactly is marketing?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've ever actually thought about the definition of it. I guess I think the best way to look at it is the act or the process of making people aware of your brand.
Okay.
And aware and interested in your brand, I should say.
Yeah. So like visibility. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you see like a lot of things where people are trying to like make people aware, you're like cringe.
Yeah. I mean, one example would be like, I see so many like websites. All right, website, it would be an example of marketing because it's making people aware and interested of your brand. Where it's just like the same bad like stock footage where, it's like a consulting company, for example. And like it's two hands shaking each other as the background. Yeah, right. Or like that. Yeah, that. Right. Or like we help your business grow, and it shows like a plant growing out of the ground. Right? Like, come on, be more interesting than that.
What about plant growing out of a hand.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
Fave. People are like, that means growth. That's like a startup community thing. Everyone in the startup community is like, do you want to grow? Are you a seed stage company? And then the plant, I'm like, get away from it. Quit it. Oh, Lord.
Yeah, and I'm like dogmatic about like, I tell my team, like, we will never use images like that with any of our stuff. We're going to use stuff that, makes people interested. We'll use like pop culture images. Like I wrote an article a couple weeks ago, put it on LinkedIn, and I can't remember what the topic of it was, but the banner photo of it was, we just kind of like slightly modified the color scheme of it, but we took a photo of Jackie from That 70s Show just like on the phone.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And in some way, tangentially related to the article, but not that I mentioned that episode or that show in the article, but like I think it had something to do with like cold calling or something like that.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, I like that. Again, just being like more interesting than the typical stock thing that people see. So I guess along those lines, like what tips would you have? Like, I feel like a lot of small business owners, particularly like the startup community is not necessarily so horrible at it, but I think a lot of small businesses who've been like kind of reliant on foot traffic and things like that during the pandemic have been like, oh God, I got to up my online game. Like, what are some of your like tips for like how to develop their story or how to kind of like increase their visibility or like do that a little bit more authentically?
I would say it's like twofold. One is getting the mindset right, and then when you have the mindset right, then you can start to enact some of the strategies. And so my ethos and the mindset I preach is stop thinking like a business person, stop thinking like an executive, and instead think like an entertainer. And the reason I say that is the entertainer they have one goal: make a connection with their audience. Right?
Yeah.
Elicit an emotional response, get them buzzing about something. And if that's your mindset, then you become so audience focused or so customer focused, then you're ready to actually figure out, okay, well, what's the right pitch or the right story we should put in front of them? And one thing I should clarify here, because it came up as a question when I was talking to someone about this last week. They said, it was a workshop I was teaching and I mentioned it. And they were like, well, what if we're like more like introverted or something like that? Like, how do we think like an entertainer? And I'm like, that's a great question. Think like an entertainer does not mean everyone should be Jim Carrey. Like over the top, like Ace Ventura, Jim Carrey is not what I'm saying. There are many different types of characters and many different types of roles. There's Ace Ventura, Jim Carrey. There is Truman Show, Jim Carrey. There is Heath Ledger in whatever movie, right? There's Christian Bale in whatever movie. There's Jennifer Aniston doing this. There's what's her name? Kerry Washington in her roles, right? They all play a different role, but ultimately the point is that it's all about what's going to be best for the audience. So I'm an over the top person, so I can rap and be loud and all that kind of stuff. It's going to work for me. I'm not saying everyone should go out and rap because probably would not be the best output.
I'll just stick to playing the flute here.
But the idea, the concept is if you're in this mindset of I am an entertainer, then you say, okay, how do I move this audience in some way? In whatever way is going to you're going to be able to pull off is fine. That matches your personality. But instead of thinking about how do I look good, you think about how do I deliver a great experience for them? And if you deliver a great experience for them, by nature, you will look good.
Okay.
So that's like the mindset aspect of it. And then from there, I think, one of like my hallmark pitch strategy here, when you think about if you are having to pitch your product, pitch your service, pitch an idea, this formula to pitch like anything to anyone and do it in under 60 seconds. I call it que pasa, which, Spanish?
No, not really. I mean, some.
Do you know what que pasa means in Spanish?
It means it's okay. Is that it?
No.
I was like, I don't know.
It means what's up or what's happening in Spanish. Okay. Yeah. So you're like, hey, que pasa, right? And so that's what you got to do when you're trying to pitch, again, your product, your service, your idea, your information, so it's PASA, which stands for problem, approach, solution, action. So you always lead with what's the problem, and you use that as an entry point into what you actually offer, into what your service is or what your product is or what you're doing, right? And so this works if you have something already, or even think about like, I don't know, let's say, that's why I say like pitch anything to anyone. This is going to work if you're trying to pitch your product. It's going to work trying to pitch your service. It's going to work if you're, and I've trained political candidates on this as well. How do you want to get an issue across, your stance on an issue? Don't just go into what you say about the issue. Talk about your understanding of the problem first and let that segue into what your solution is, right? Your PASA, approach and solution. If you're an employee and you're trying to pitch something internally to your manager, follow this formula. Because what it's going to do is it naturally adopts that entertainer mindset. Because by leading with the problem, you are so intently focused on audience first. Because problem is all about, well, what's the current, whoever I'm talking to or the people I'm referencing, what's it like for them today? And why does that then make sense for us to do this thing about it?
That is really good. That's like really hard to do too, I think. Like it's really hard to like sometimes, even though like there's been organizations, like I've worked at organizations we work with now, as soon as you're like, oh, like on the other side of the table, you completely can't even remember what it is that you ever thought about over there. Like on the other side, you're like, huh. Or like if you're like at a retail store, you're like, I've worked at a retail store. What are they thinking about this? And then you're like, you know, like, or whatever. It's like so hard to like kind of get in the shoes of the people that are like in your audience. So I'm like, huh.
But when you do, they say, oh, this person gets me. This person understands this audience, this market, these customers really well. And when people feel seen and heard and understood, they are way more likely to be open to receiving whatever it is that you have for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really smart. I like that. This is like kind of that hair care for men commercial where he's like, I'm not only the owner, I'm also a client.
Yes.
So I always think of that when I'm thinking of, I like how we have so many references going on in this. Cackle, like we were to hashtag them, there's going to be like 95 references. Anyway, so hair for men, there we go. Or whatever it's called. The
Hair Club for Men, I think is what it is.
Hair Club for Men, thank you. Why I need to know. I see it's like, oh my God. But so it's like you help startups and help like companies that are trying to craft their stories and like increase visibility and things like that. But like you also run a small business yourself. Like you are are a business owner. And so like, why did you decide to kind of like start your own company, and like, how has that like entrepreneurial journey been for you? Oh no, are you frozen? Or am I frozen?
All right, we're back.
Oh, okay, good. I was like, are you frozen or are you just thinking? And then I was like, oh my God, he is frozen. That's never happened.
Good to know my frozen face is a thinking face and not like,
I know, which is mostly people's faces when they are frozen. So very good. Yeah. So how has that journey been for you? Like starting.
The question was asked. Sorry, say it one more time.
So like, how has like you made the leap to kind of like start your own business? Like, how has that entrepreneurial journey been for you?
Journey is probably the right word. Here's how I'll answer this. At the end of my podcast, at the end of every episode, I ask my guests, fill in the blank, entrepreneurship is blank. And I've gotten some really good answers from that, really different and varying answers. My answer to that question, which I think can appropriately answer your question around how's the journey been, my answer is entrepreneurship is waking up every day and facing your own mortality.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's been a really like fun journey and I really enjoy it. But it's also knowing that like you're putting yourself on the line every day. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no matter how good you're doing, how much like revenue you're making, there's still like, it's like, well, it's not over, right? I still have to come back and do this. And at any given point, you realize like the rug could be pulled out from underneath you.
Yeah.
So it's like this constant battle of like, it's like you do what you love, but there's like pressure at the same time. And I think a good reference point for this would be Jay-Z. Let's add another reference into our bag here. And it's in a way, it's how I've tried to like adopt it. I've tried to adopt this as much as possible. But back in 2003, when he said he was retiring,
I know it's going to be a retirement joke. I hope so.
So he had the Black Album, which is like at the time his retirement album, and then he stayed retired for like a year. And the last song on the album was called "My First Song," and the hook in that he said, treat my last like my first and my first like my last. And I think that's kind of how you have to approach this whole thing. It's like, because if it's your first time, like you have all the excitement possible because it's the first time you're doing something and you're also a little bit nervous about it. And that nervous energy drives you. If it's your last time, you're like, well, if this is the last time I'm ever doing this, like I want to make sure it's like the best thing ever. And that is this balance I think we're always playing as entrepreneurs. And why I say it's waking up every day and facing your own mortality.
Oh, that's so interesting. That is way better of an answer than I would have given.
That's
I just ask the questions. I love that. That is so good. I'm gonna have to start saying that. I one time heard Doug Song is the founder of Duo Security, which is like a large cybersecurity company in Ann Arbor that sold to Cisco. And he one time said, which I always probably incorrectly quote this, that like running a company is like always like your 3 worst days or your 3 best days. And I do find that to be like along the line so true, where like I'll be like, oh, this happened, doing so great today, entry point, taking over the earth. And then like next day I'll be like, we are losers, probably gonna
I know. It really is that. It's almost like, okay, another metaphor reference here. It's almost like a baseball season, right? 162 games long. You have 4-game winning streaks. You have 7-game losing streaks. You go 500 for a month. You have a 9-game winning streak and a 2-game losing streak. And it's like, that what you just described is like exactly that, where it's like, hey, 4 days, your 3 best days happen, then your 3 worst days happen. And I think the key is you just keep playing.
Yeah. But I'm glad you explained more about baseball, because I was like, band kid does not get this reference. Keep nodding your head. I'm like, I don't know anything about sports. Yes.
I just assume everyone in Michigan, because the company I used to work at was based out of the Detroit area. So I know a lot of people in Michigan. I just assume based off of that experience that everyone in Michigan is a huge Detroit Tigers fan. But you have proven me wrong.
But I am never in those conversations. So like as soon as people start talking about sports, I'm like, I start thinking about like the pandemic or the weather or something. Like I just
or band.
I started like, what's that one song I used to play with that one girl in band? That was so good. I should start playing again.
What instrument did you play?
Flute. I'm like very stereotypical flute player.
Okay.
Like people are
now,
unless people are like, you play the clarinet? I'm like, no, what? Do I look like a clarinet player?
Classic flautist over here.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you look at Entry Point. How do you bring Emily the flautist into Entry Point? And that's your version of an entertainer.
Yeah, you can't block this personality from literally any place. So that is a problem that I actually try to quell that. Like I'll just be like, less Emily the flute player in this situation. So that's why it's like I'll be on LinkedIn and I'll be writing things. Like I'll be like, oh, this is gonna be so funny. I'm like, oh wait a minute, LinkedIn. They don't want funny on LinkedIn, right? Like harder. Yeah.
No, bring some humor to LinkedIn. It needs it.
I know it's so dry and terrible over there. You're streaming live on LinkedIn. See, you're welcome, LinkedIn.
Just selling out LinkedIn while streaming live on the platform.
goes off on that platform, I'm like, okay, thanks. They're like, we approved you to stream here and we can unapprove you. And I'm like,
this will be my first time on a LinkedIn live stream because I still have not gotten the approval for it.
Yeah, they're like, I don't know why. I'm like, what? Really? Like,
they're usually 2 years behind every other platform in like rolling out a feature.
I know. And you would have thought that in the beginning of the pandemic, they would have just been like, okay, well, this is going to be a thing now. But no, they just like kept, I don't know. We could go on and on, but cool. Okay. Well, yay. Well, thank you so much for joining. I will. Oh, what is it? What are you looking forward to in 2021? Like, what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I just got married, as you know, so I'm looking forward to the day when we can take a honeymoon. That will be nice.
Yeah.
Shout out to Bay. What's up, Bay? And then on the business side, what I'm really excited about, we've like soft rolled it out so far. We'll do an announcement, like a formal announcement later on, but we have soft rolled out a new product that I call Hype Songs, which is I take your company's pitch or whatever you want to promote about your company, and we convert it into a rap song. And so you have your own like branded theme song now that you can put in front of customers, in front of prospects, in front of anybody to hype up your brand.
Yeah, that's so fun. I like that. I'm like, maybe I should have that flute in the background, you know.
There you go.
No, you're like, no flute in the background. I'm like, okay.
Flute could work. Okay.
Yeah.
There's been some good hip hop beats that have had flute in them.
That's true. You're like, I can't think of any, but I'm like, yeah, me neither. That's a different show.
No, you know what? I think it was Redman. I think it was like an Indian flute, or there was actually Timbaland had a song called Indian Flute. So there you go.
That just came full circle around. I like that. That was perfect. So many references. We can't even. Okay. I like that. Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining. We'll put links to Startup Hypeman and like things like that in our in the comment section. And then it was great catching up with you. And I'm so excited to see you one day in the future. We'll see each other again.
One day soon. It was great to catch up with you, Emily. And thank you for having me. I enjoyed cackling about with you on the Cackle.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Okay. See you later.